Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hello, good morning, everybody. A hearty welcome to each and every one of you for joining in this webinar. That is the pandemic, toxic discourse, and cultural healing. Dr. D.V. Nayak, Principal, Dr. M.K. Umate College, Nagpur. Dr. Prashant Shilke, Principal, Press Club College, Nagpur. Dr. Vandana Benjamin, Director, Vincent Apostolic College, Nagpur. And I, your host for today, Dr. Veena Joseph, at Department of English, Press College, Nagpur, along with my entire department, extend a hearty and a warm welcome to each and every one of you. Our resource person for today, Dr. Dinesh Kumar Nayak, is an erudite scholar, and we have immense pleasure in introducing him to all of you. And we are so thankful to you, Dr. Dinesh Nayak, for accepting our invitation. Thank you so much, sir, that in a very short span of time, you agreed to come and be with us this beautiful and wonderful morning. Dr. Dinesh Kumar Nayak, Associate Professor, Department of English, D.G. Waze College, Mulund, Mumbai. Dr. Dinesh Kumar Nayak is a research supervisor, academician, curriculum designer, writer, corporate trainer. Wow, that is amazing, sir. Really amazing. Your career highlights 28 years of UG, PG, and research level teaching. Doctoral degree from Mumbai University on motherhood as a mode of survival in contemporary African American fiction. Provide 23 MPhil and 5 PhD dissertations, has published 8 books and 24 research papers, designed curriculum for 4 universities and 5 autonomous institutions. Sir, really, hats off to you. Your publication, you can see that, sir, and research papers on cultural studies, eco-criticism, media memory, speciesism, new diaspora. Sir, really, really, hats off to you, sir, for doing so much. And your areas of research are incredible. Diverse topics that you have taken up, you'll see, all of us can see that critical race theory, Mexican fiction, culinary, cultural politics, cultural citizenship, memory studies, geopoetic, and on and on and on. So the list is just endless. You sir has been given talks and keynote lectures in so many places, and the topic that sir has taken up, we can see a few of them. But just a few of them. Sir has delivered talks, been the resource person in so many other places, teaching literature, cultural mediation in the classroom, soundscape in Shakespearean drama, South Asian literature and cultural diplomacy. Sir, how do you find time for all the things apart from teaching? That is something, sir, really. We all highly appreciate that you are really an erudite scholar, researcher, professor, doing so many things, multitasking. So really, it's a great privilege and honor for us to have you be with us this morning. And dear audience and participants, thank you so much for being with us this morning. And I assure you, you are going to love it. You're going to enjoy learning together. And dear friends, let me tell all of you, this is a wonderful platform, a great platform where all of us learn together. We are here together, joining from across the whole world. And that is for one reason we are learning. And we're learning together. What could be better than that? So here, without much ado and without taking much of your time, I invite and I want all of you, wherever you are, to join your hands and give a warm welcome to Dr. Dinesh Kumar Nayak. So welcome, and over to you, sir. Thank you so much. Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. Thanks a lot. All right. Is my slide visible on screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Good morning, one and all.
Good morning, everyone.
At the very outset, let me put on record my immense gratitude for the principals and managements of three very highly motivated institutions from Nagpur. The principal and management of Dr. M.K. Umathe College, the principal and management of Hislop College, and also the principal and management of Vincent Apostolic Degree College, Nagpur. And these colleges have been represented here in this discussion by three of my best friends, Dr. Veena, Dr. Naik, and Dr. Vandana. They have always made me feel, whenever I have been to Nagpur, that I was always at home. And the feeling is not different even today. And I am so much at home, I feel that even with a very formal topic, that I'm in a kind of an informal space. So thank you so much for all the warmth and all the initiative that you have taken. I must also welcome all the delegates, and I hope that all of you are safely away from the pandemic. And I wish all of you a great time ahead. Let there be more green zones in our society and in our lives, even as we discuss plentiful about the pandemic. Well, coming back to what I intend to do today, I've been given about an hour, 60 minutes of time, during which I will roughly make a kind of a ramble, touching upon the three key areas. One is the pandemic, then the notion of toxic discourse, and healing culture. The title, in a way, announces the contemporary significance of pandemic discourse, because the pandemic is not just a matter of virus, and it's not just a biological, or it's not a medical issue. It is also a matter of what we talk in the contemporary society. And by the term discourse, what I have in mind is all the dictionary meanings of the term, like a long and serious discussion on a subject. And here our subject is definitely the pandemic. It also means the use of language in speech and writing to produce some meaning. So the objective of this discourse itself is to produce some kind of a meaning about the pandemic and the literature about a pandemic. At the beginning, when we had an initial discussion on what I would rather do, I was asked to talk something on language. But then honestly, I must confess that when it really comes to an online session like this, I feel very jittery, mainly because, what Mark Prensky says, that I feel that I'm a digital immigrant, whereas some of my listeners are digital natives, where they would understand the more nuances of this online communication and e-learning. Nonetheless, I thought I would rather venture into that. I would show some amount of courage and then start with this. So after this preamble, let me also make it very clear that the title allows me, apart from whatever linguistic and literary space, I believe the title gives me the discursive space to ramble off from the pandemic, that is the immediate social situation, to language and literature, with the boundaries between these topics to be more porous and allowing me to shift from one to another. Now, starting with the very meaning of the word pandemic, and I found a very interesting etymology of the word pandemic. It has a Greek origin. It comes from two words, pand and demos. Pan stands for all, and demos stands for people. And it was much later, only in 17th century, the word pandemic drifted into English. to indicate what we understand of that today. Now, what I found very interesting in the definition, or rather in the etymology of this word, is the term demos. That it is, if you combine all and people together, I feel there is a kind of a democracy about the pandemic, which we will try and check as we proceed in the session, whether the discussion creates a kind of a democracy, and the pandemic also creates that. Well, moving ahead, I find essentially, when I survey the society and what is happening in the society, I find, like Aya Richard once said about the referential language and figurative language, I find two distinct uses of language around me in the current situation. One is the language as it is used in the domain of pandemic. And this domain of pandemic has rather percolated into almost all aspects of our life. I mean, the medical, the legal, academic, and so on. Now, when you look at on the left-hand side, there are a few terms like killer virus. Now, the very metaphor, the very act of metaphorization of this virus into a killer itself is a part of this discourse, or what we call the pandemic discourse or the toxic discourse that we are going to deal with. And the other term is the war on corona. The war on corona, it gives a sense of emergency to all of us. And it also makes us feel that all of us are probably the soldiers in this war, though our enemy is not very clearly visible. And then the term like single day spike, the word spike has many connotations today. The spike of the virus, and also the spike in the number of cases. All of them are, all of them create an alarming sense in all of us. And then also the terms like cases. Cases now no longer represent the legal cases or the ordinary medical cases. We clearly indicate what the term clearly indicates the corona cases. And also the term Chinese virus, which was used by the American president. Chinese virus, I would say that this term is a part of the toxic rhetoric. I'll come to that a little later. At the same time, even when we are surrounded by this kind of language, what I also find with some people, especially the people have a poetic sensibility, a creative sensibility, using language in a different way. They use language poetically. They use language to create a trans-pandemic sensibility or a trans-pandemic experience. And on the right-hand side, I picked up a poem which I randomly found out somewhere online. And the title of the poem is Lockdown in Spring. It's more about the arrival of spring in the situation of lockdown. So we'll read the poem a little closely and see how the poet has used spring and lockdown as two different tropes which overlap, and within the framework of probably a love poem. And what is very, very, very important from the context of our environment is the return of nature, in this poem. The poem goes like this: I peer transfixed at your sensual spring heralding eyes, thinking of the flowers that you bear. Your eyes, they invite with the seasonal thrill, and their night-like depth enchant. You lock me down again in countless magical ways with the promises of soft textures, fragrances, and delight. And what the poet has done very deftly in these lines is a kind of metaphorization of one with another. The season is metaphorized into the theme of love, and love itself is metaphorized with the season. And most importantly, the whole poem, I feel, is like a graffiti. And when I read this poem, I was reminded of the kind of art, the kind of writing that some of these very, very amateurish artists at one point of time in Terezin concentration camp in Czech Republic during the Second World War would write. So it's almost like that you have a graffiti on which you have to express something to create a language, to create a discourse that would help one to survive. So this is the healing aspect. This is precisely the healing aspect of the culture. Like many other things, culture also heals in this situation. I'll come to that premise a little later. Now coming to the key term here, toxic discourse. Even after reading much about toxic discourse, the term remains a little elusive because Lawrence Buell, one of the pioneers of eco-criticism and one of the great professors of Harvard University, had coined this term. And in an essay that spells out the features and the limits of toxic discourse, Buell says that it is about the fear of a poisoned world. However, Buell also maintains that this fear to some extent is integral in raising environmental and ecological consciousness. And this fear, if it is played out a little in excess, is also dangerous. So we are located somewhere in between. Somewhere we need to mobilize this kind of a discourse, which could be applied even in the context of the infection and the pandemic. And we find toxic discourse in a number of disciplines, like in medicine, in political science, history, sociology, economics, and in ethics. Also, we could extend the scope of this toxic discourse to the contemporary situation, to implicate the discourse articulating the fear of infection in a world that we are living, and that to a world where this sense is awakened, this sense awakens the toxic consciousness. And toxic consciousness is slightly different from toxic discourse. Toxic consciousness also implicates all those efforts to consciously make the world polluted or toxic. Particularly that happens in the context of the business consciousness. Well, I was anyway talking about the next term, toxic rhetoric. A classic example of toxic rhetoric is what one can find in many of the speeches of President Trump, especially when he speaks about the immigrants, Mexican immigrants, and much recently when he started speaking about the coronavirus as the Chinese virus. What one runs into here is the ethics of metaphors. Are we ethically correct when we are using metaphors about the pandemic, about the victims of the pandemics, about the infected groups, and so on? And also, within the purview of this discussion is to extend this template of toxic discourse or the pandemic discourse. I expect the term toxic discourse at some point of time to mutate into pandemic discourse, like the virus itself. And to look at the toxic or the pandemic discourse as a template to critique all that anthropocentric concern about the pandemic. It seems that humanity, though ironically we are, and paradoxically we are in a way celebrating the return of the nature with ozone layers repairing themselves. We celebrate this return of nature on one hand, but at the same time, I feel also there is a return of the Anthropocene, this focus on human beings, and also once again committed to the collective survival of human beings. And what we need to keep in mind at one point is that we need to keep distance from human beings and not from the other species anyway, apart from the microbial species anyway. Well, The world that we are living in currently is a world of viral words as much it is the world of the virus, where what one finds is that in the last 30 or maybe last 60 days or so, many words have evolved and mutated to accumulate new meanings, new semantic contexts. Some of them are, for example, very classic example is that of the word positive. Positive in the word positive in medical history has mutated many times. If you see the history of that evolution, in the context of a situation like a pregnancy test, turning positive, it has a very different connotation. It has a very different appeal also to the one who receives the result. Much later, in the wake of HIV, the word positive had a very different connotation, and it had a stigma. It still has a stigma when it is attached to HIV positive. And when it comes to the current situation of COVID-19 coronavirus, the word positive has a very different meaning, may not be life-threatening, but at the same time, very alarming. So that's how the words have changed in this viral world. Words also jump, their meanings jump across disciplines and domains, like the virus. So I find a lot of similarities between the language and the virus here. For example, the word zones. They have been used in many disciplines. Conventionally, one finds that in geography and related disciplines. And today we use it in the context of disease control. And we have those color codes attached to that in terms of green, orange, and red zones. And similar is the case of the word cases. Cases have evolved over a period of time. What we now implicate is that the word means the cases of coronavirus, and the number, the ratio of infection are all implicated by the term cases. Coming back to the very primary term, toxic discourse, we are into a little bit of a paradox here, to assess whether we are in an era where the language really matters. And somebody would argue by saying that discourse is of a low priority when health and even poverty are often jeopardized. I would definitely maintain that these are issues, but then discourse too really matters, because I believe that words do heal, human behavior does heal, and part of human behavior is in the use of words. Then it is also important because we are also living in an era where we have started spreading the virus of misrepresentation. There is misrepresentation about the people who are affected, who are infected. There is also a lot of viral misinformation about us. It largely comes with a lot of scams about the treatment, misinformed discourses about COVID-19 vaccines and so on. We are surrounded by them and there is no escape. And what the discourse has also given us is a kind of a climate, is a kind of an ecology where we have started talking about the environmental or the planetary apocalypticism triggered by the pandemic. Now, this is like this is very similar to the Holocaust discourse. So maybe it's the fear or the anxiety of the survival that leads us to this point of discussion. And I'm also reminded of this wonderful German sociologist, Ulrich Beck, who coined this term, risk society. It's a very interesting term. Somehow I feel that there is a lot of compatibility between what Beck had coined in the context of society and the current human society. Beck, in his analysis of modern life, says that whether we live in poverty or with a lot of amenities, we share the same risk in the modern world. He also talks about this immiseration, the economic impoverization of the world, that has happened because of many unmindful intervention with nature. This term can be invoked in our discussion on pandemic discourse or toxic discourse. And Beck was also, at one point, very interestingly, he had also mentioned that that poverty is hierarchical, but smog, which stands for pollution, is democratic. I would extend this discussion to the context of pandemic and say it would be interesting to examine whether the pandemic is democratic, though the poverty is very hierarchical. Very interesting position that we could address at some point in time. We are also in a way threatened in discourse largely by the sense of this helplessness, inability, that even with the science's assistance, we are not able to calculate the lethal consequences of everyday life. And these consequences could include death. These consequences could also include the forced migration of the migrant workers, and so on. Well, toxic discourse gets also extended in the media, not just the social media, but also the visual media largely. That despite using the mask of humor, and one of the tropes that I want to examine is mask, and mask is a kind of a two-way filter of all kinds of viruses around us. So that the very use of humor as a mask is also an interesting engagement that we might have. Toxic discourse gets refracted through media, through a bit of visuals. The toxicity and the alarm gets a little diluted, but nonetheless it remains. It is also based on this insistence that a healthy environment is a necessity for a healthy economy. Now, the current economic crisis is also the result of our mindless intervention with the environment. We have understood that for the malls to run, for the movies to continue, to have a very good shopping experience, we need a healthy environment. So this is the positive side of the toxic discourse or the pandemic discourse. What one also finds in our society, in our language communities, is this toxic discourse or the pandemic discourse montaging into Gothic. And I'll delve a bit into this Gothification of this discourse also. Toxic discourse also recognizes the physical environment of human beings as not holistic, spiritual, or biotic, but a network of many networks. So this very idea that everything is connected to everything else gains more significance. That is Barry Commoner's idea gains a lot of currency in this context. And today we also need to look at the role of language in creating this toxic or viral anxiety that we have experienced, and whether language can alleviate that, whether language can heal that, and specialized use of language can use. I strongly feel that to some extent language can definitely heal. Coming to this idea of monsterization of COVID-19, I would rather say that coronavirus is a term with spikes, and spikes being another trope in this whole discourse. Spikes to get attached, spikes, sharp spikes that can hurt, and spikes that wouldn't let go. And I would feel that literally and metaphorically, coronavirus is there to stay for some time. And what is happening in a number of memes and number of social media messages is that the words get associated with the visual allegories of death and doom in plentiful. And some of them are used maybe in a serio-comic way, but not in black humor. I would come to that. The Gothification of virus very often happens with the exaggeration of the public health issues. Exaggeration in terms of the news and the voiceover that we get about the shortage of isolation wards and so on. And they are again in plentiful around us. And these are also the result, or rather such monsterization is also a result of metaphorization that amplifies the death-dealing power of the virus. Death-dealing power is in terms of that at one stage one would feel that a company like Lifebuoy does not make hand wash anymore, but they make virus killers, virus fighters. So that's how the Gothification has happened. While on one hand, we feel threatened by the pandemic discourse. On the other hand, we are also involved in sanitizing the language, because language to some extent can heal and cure. So the whole disease control lexicon that goes around us has this hyper sanitized approach. For example, the term social distancing is any day better, is any day less hurtful than the word isolation. The affected patients are not isolated, but then they are into some kind of social distancing, as are the people who are not affected. So this is also the time when we do and we have to use more politically correct language. And a classic example of is that to use whether to use the term migrant workers or guest workers. In Kerala, they've started using the term guest workers instead of migrant workers, because guest workers is a term that gives a lot of agency for the workers, respect and agency for the workers, while migrant workers is a term that evacuates the agency and selfhood of the workers. Then we are also involved, and ideally we should be in cleaning and disinfecting the language of racism, sexism, speciesism, and so on. To give just one example of racism. Racism is not necessarily across the races or across the continents. Recently, there was a report about a group of Manipuri nurses who decided to leave West Bengal because they were victims of racial slur, of being accused of the producers of coronavirus. And the alignment is very, very clear here. The racial alignment is very clear. And also the question whether the world is evenly infected or not, because the pandemic also leaves many people in more disadvantage as compared to some privileged people. Language is also masked. I believe the mask is more about the filter. It's more than what we filter in. It is more about what we filter out. So this metaphorical mask filters the virus or hurtful expressions, and this itself is a very different use of mask. I would give an example from the language of WHO. I have been following WHO ever since the outbreak of this pandemic. If you have been following Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, he has been very categorical. He has been very mindful in the use of language. Even when there was an outbreak as early as maybe November in China, he was not in a hurry to brand this outbreak as a pandemic. So he, in fact, in a way, he delayed the use of this P word, pandemic, for quite some time, because he knew that it would trigger a panic anyway. Instead of that, he kept on using terms like threat, potential, and so on till 11th March. So that itself shows how a responsible health worker or a health organization should be using language and sanitizing the language to keep away from this toxic part of it. What I also find in abundance is a kind of seriocomic use of language. And this is not definitely the conventional black humor that you associate with existentialism and the post-World War pessimism. This is more, I would rather say it is seriocomic metaphorics, where there is more fun in using the language, there is more fun in using the metaphors and figures of speech. Particularly so are the words and expressions that we find in those memes around us. And you can see there on the screen a board which was put up in a church in Virginia, this Grace Brethren Church in Virginia. This might apparently look like a bit of black humor, but it is not. The text goes like this: 6 feet apart today is better than 6 feet under tomorrow. The very popularity of this board is that subsequently this was taken up by many churches, and they had put up this board at many different places for public to understand that even religion can wait, even religious functions can wait, and that one need not rush with to show one's allegiance to God. Equally interesting is a kind of viral humor that we have, and this virus, thankfully, is one way that we tide over the grim atmosphere. What is very interesting about this humor that we get through memes is that these are humorous statements. These are memes which are copies, as Budria would tell. These are copies without the original, and anything goes in this world. So it's all about how one can circulate these copies around to make the people feel less burdened by the toxic discourse. And it leads to some interesting questions. What is the core of this humor? What is the core of this laughter? Because every laughter is different. For example, existential laughter is different, that one finds in the theater of the absurd. Similarly, when we look at this situation, what is the nature? What is the core of this laughter that we have? Is it is it so that we laugh at what we cannot endure, or do we laugh our way back to sanity and life? Now, these are some questions which have come to my mind. And meanwhile, the netizens are involved in immense amount of creative humor, and we might have already seen the number of memes that have come out. Anything from toilet paper, because there was a toilet paper crisis, not so much in India, but in the Western world, to the reopening of liquor shop. That is pretty much an Indian situation. A number of these memes and humorous messages that have come up, maybe they were viral, but then they also helped us in many ways. moving ahead, I would rather walk you through some of these messages and memes, which I believe are are in essence the serio-comic metaphorization, but also in many ways they help us to think and to look at our own situation in a less toxic way, threatening way. Look at this one. Your grandparents were called to war. You're being called to sit on your couch. You can do this. So it's a kind of comparison between war and the current confinement. And to tell that it is not as bad as war, though the metaphor of war also goes around. I'll come to that a little later. There is another health tip that has come up, which again uses this serio-comic tone. It's a health tip. It goes like this: spread chili pepper on your hands. It does nothing against viruses, but you learn really fast not to touch your face. So what one also finds is this amplified image of the chilies. Well, coming back to this metaphorization, what one finds is a variety, a huge spectrum of metaphors. And on one hand, one finds the production of new heroes in our society. And suddenly, the cricketers, the film stars, are not the heroes. And currently, we have these health workers as soldiers and heroes. Look at that on the right-hand side. Doctors suddenly have become the heroes. The health workers too have become the heroes. And on the other hand, the people who break the social distancing rules are termed traitors and dissenters. And obviously, the message is towards some kind of loyalty towards one's own community. Again, this leads to the question, are we all soldiers now? When I break the chain of infection, do I become a soldier myself? That also is an interesting question. And again, on the right-hand side, you can find a lot of these brands, including those car manufacturers implicating social distancing. You can see the Volkswagen, you can also see the Audi logo, much spaced out to indicate that social distancing is an imperative. And also, at the same time, this discourse, this kind of metaphorization is not without politics. By politics, I mean not just the party politics, but also international relations and human rights and all other issues. So many politicians in India and in the US and the Western world have been calling for obedience. Now this has become, COVID discourse or the pandemic discourse has become a cover to expect and demand more obedience on the part of the citizens. And for awareness, less of awareness and more of obedience, and less of solidarity and more of patriotism. And Trump's very coinage that it is a Chinese virus is an indication of the kind of polarization that he expects out of this discourse. Beneath all these metaphors, I find this elusive, powerful, invisible enemy of the virus, which remains in language but not visible to the eyes. Coming to the cultural part, as I feel that a culture would heal, and I would cultural production, cultural texts like the films, like poetry, drama, narratives will be largely helpful in healing. Also, the study of these literary forms could also be healing. And this is slightly speculative, but nonetheless, I will share with all of you. I feel that there could be disaster subcultures once we are out of this, or even during this time itself. We might have interdisciplinary engagements like COVID studies, pandemic studies, and so on. And we will also initiate the study of poetry, narratives And also there is a possibility of new genres coming up in literature, which will open up huge amount of interdisciplinary engagements. Then infection and cure, like survival in war literature. Infection and cure will emerge as the literary focus. Trauma and rehabilitation, trauma of not just the people who are directly impacted by the virus, trauma of migrant workers. We have had hundreds and thousands of these narratives, visual and otherwise, about the plight of the workers, the struggle, and also some amazing stories of their survival after traveling 1,500 kilometers or so. And also these grave diggers. These are not the grave diggers of Hamlet. These are the grave diggers of places like Ahmedabad and other cities, where they have the responsibility of burying nearly 100 and 150 corpses in a single day under pressure. And also, I strongly believe that art and humor are more like normalizing efforts rather than escapist. And art and humor would normalize the situation without ignoring. I don't believe that that the art would be very escapist. Even when the nature is recovered, I don't think that is going to be escapist. And laughter, as I mentioned earlier, laughter is the best medicine, next to probably or as equal to human behavior, I believe. And or well, at least until we find an antiviral or a vaccine for COVID-19. I also have culled very quickly two distinct samples of literature. One is literature for pandemic, and the other one is the literature about the pandemic. Literature for the pandemic is an attempt to go back in time, to go back into our own archives and literary archives, and to see whether we can read certain texts to make our present situation more bearable, so that we can tide over this situation. So I picked up this these lines from a play by the great Irish poet and writer Seamus Heaney. It is from the play. This play itself has an interesting context. This is Cure et Troy is a re-rendering of Sophocles' Greek tragedy on Philoctetes. Philoctetes was a disabled archer who was in a way coerced into the battle to fight on behalf of the Grecians against the Trojans. And at the end of that, he gets miraculously healed. So the whole context is about war and the miraculous healing that is possible. So that is why I invoke these lines here. So let's read that part of the play. And the segment goes like this. History says, don't hope on this side of the grave. But then, once in a lifetime, the longed for tidal wave of justice can rise up, and hope and history rhyme. It's a very interesting use of metaphor. It is metapoetic in a way, by using a figure of speech that is, that the rhyme itself as a metaphor, by saying that hope and history can at some point rhyme, can sync, and can be aligned. The second part is that reachable from here. Believe in miracles and cures and healing wells. So the water imagery that one finds in the first part concerns to heal. And from here, I move on to a very contemporary cultural expression. It's a poem by David Simmons, which was published recently on 29th April. And David Simmons, interestingly, is an Anglo-Jewish poet, extensively involved in writing all kinds of poetry, including the electronic versions. It's slightly a longish poem, but still I would read that, because I can promise that I am almost to the end of that. And it is it's a very interesting poem that once again is a meta-linguistic, it is meta-literary, wherein figures of speech mutate from one to another, making the boundaries of their identity also very, very porous. So let's read this poem. Interestingly, the poem is titled Masking the Question. So it is about creating a mask for the question and also creating a question for the mask. Will you soon be wearing a mask on your face? If you decide it looks out of place, will you choose a design worn with fashion and grace, or should it be considered to wear one or not, and only adopted when you need to shop? So the very idea that mask is a part of an outfit in the public domain comes up here. Then, as we proceed, at times when you travel, but not far from home, when everyone wears one and you stand out alone, beginning to wonder with a smile on your face, should you wear one too or ignore your disgrace? So this is also the current social discourse, also the stigma when we appear in public without a mask, and what would be the impression that it would create, and also mask as a social pressure also comes up along with the convention that we wear the mask. The poem continues, how close are you to a mask on your face? The stranger that distances self, walking by, what do you read from the look in their eyes, in their eye? If they think you are contagious, what tells them why? Or is the mask on their face a self-righteous disguise? Now, these are the semantic layers of mask. You know, it's like what are we masking out and what are we masking in, or filtering out and filtering in, like what Robert Frost would say in his poem Mending Wall. And the poem continues, and what if it happens the reverse way around, and if you should cough but don't cover your mouth, is your name on a label that spreads it around? So this is about this eventuality of coughing and whether the mask in a way saves you in that situation or not, and what kind of an identity that you will gain when you do that. To answer the question, we must embrace, should you be wearing a mask on your face? Once again, this uneasy idea of wearing a mask comes in. The poem concludes with these lines, to give each other room, knowing we must stay safe, is the only real choice, and not out of place, but consider the question. We have to embrace yes, no, or maybe. There are three, yes, no, maybe. All three are acceptable in the context of masking and in the context of the larger context of this pandemic discourse. Wear a mask on your face, the poem continues, wear a mask on our face. When do we or don't we wear a mask on our face? The poem begins with a question. The poem ends with a question. Interestingly, the syntactic structure of the poem is that of interrogation. We have interrogative questions, and I believe the mainstay of pandemic discourse is definitely the interrogative syntax rather than assertions. Some of the memes I'll end up by sharing this. There have been a lot of re-rendering of the titles of the classics, like 100 Days of Solitude instead of 100 Years of Solitude, instead of On the Road, Not on the Road, and so on. The Handmaid's Tale becomes the Hand Washing Maid's Tale, and so on. So this is the creativity. This is the kind of humor. This is the outcome of the pandemic discourse. I have been using my resources largely from these online sites, websites, and archives, and also look at this Lifebuoy message that they have extended their brotherhood to the other companies as well, like the Dettol, Safeguard, and Lux, promoting in a way a kind of consortium in using soap, hand wash, and so on. And they're at the end of my discourse, and as I had forewarned all of you that it was a ramble into a number of social situations, into literature for the pandemic and about the pandemic, about the humor that helps us to tide over the anxiety of the era, and to use the toxic discourse and pandemic discourse two ways. In one way, to generate awareness, and also to stay away from very harmful anxiety that is in circulation. And I must definitely say that that I've been immensely rewarded, and I'm on my way of some therapy, because I had a huge fear of this medium, and I'm sure that I'm on my way to heal of this fear of this online medium. And thank you so much for your patient listening, and I'm sure we'll be able to take the discussion forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you very much.
That
was really very, very interesting. I'm sure all our audience, our participants were just engrossed. Yes or no? Yes, for sure, definitely. A lot of hard work has gone on. It's not easy. It's not easy really to compile everything. And you have done a great, incredible job, sir.
Thank you
so much for that.
Thanks a lot.
And I'm sure all our participants have really learned so much. They have been holding on. I could see in the chat box wonderful comments coming up. And for the formal vote of thanks, I would like to request Dr. Vandana Benjamin to please give the vote of thanks. We do have questions as well, and we will just take up a few questions, there's 4 or 5 of them.
Yeah.
Yes. And sir, I can see one question over here on Bharti. They have asked a question like, sir, is this virus curable or not? Is this virus curable or not? The question has come from Anna Bharti.
Okay. I think, see, my answer will be very speculative if I give, is virus curable? But I can say that gradually the humanity will start learning how to live in an infected environment. And definitely the medical science will come up, I'm sure, with some kind of a treatment, some kind of a viral control. Currently, what I have heard is that it's not that we don't have vaccines, but then the load of antibodies is a question. That we should have sufficient amount of antibodies so that once you take the vaccine, it should last for the lifetime. So I'm hopeful that, anyway, I'm very hopeful that it would definitely come.
So another question has come by Mr. Dinesh Kumar Shinde.
Mhm.
Discourse by so-called democratic ways are more destructive than pandemics.
So-called democratic ways are more destructive than pandemic. I don't know what is implicated in that, but I somehow feel that discourse has to be democratic. Discourse is a democratic space, and if I extend my basic definition, that it is a use of language in speech and writing, I would rather say that the use of language by as many people as possible in the production of meaning. I believe that the meaning making process should be pluralistic, and hence it has to be in its very makeup, it has to be very democratic. That's what I would believe.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for that. Another last question for you, and that is from Adelaide.
Yeah.
In this time, people are sometimes more worried about themselves because they are scared that resources will not be available for them. It's then that they resort to discrimination. So how to make people understand this?
Fine, that it's a very good point. I like that because it skipped my mind at one stage. See, the scarcity discourse is also a part of this pandemic discourse or toxic discourse. Somewhere we have this fear that we pass on to people that there won't be sufficient. So that's what we have, this panic buying in malls, which even forced some of the malls to shut down in parts of India. So yeah, there is this scarcity discourse that makes us feel at somewhere we feel that we I need to store enough. But I believe that by and by, once the lockdown is lifted in stages, we will get to know that there is sufficient transport of goods, and then we might come out of it. But currently, it is a part of this pandemic discourse anyway. Thanks for that question. It's a nice one.
Thank you, sir, once again. And over to Dr. Vandana Benjamin to say the formal vote of thanks. Dr. Vandana Benjamin, please. Unmute.
Her mic has to be unmuted.
Vandana ma'am, please unmute your mic. Yes.
A very good afternoon to one and all. It was a very good, interesting and informative session given by Dr. Dinesh Nair, sir. Sir, whatever you had given was the need of the hour. And very nicely, you have explained the pandemic, toxic discourse, and healing culture. I think we all are benefited, and we thank you from the bottom of our heart. And even I thank all the participants who were with us today, and the information was really helpful to one and all. I even thank the panelists here who are there with me, Dr. Veena Joseph, for coordinating and making the session very lively. Even Dr. Naik sir for being a source of inspiration and helping us. Especially, I thank Dr. Dinesh Nair sir for taking out time and making this session a fruitful one. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot.
I take this opportunity to thank all the participants here.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much to all the participants. Thank you so much for being with us all the time. And thank you, Dr. Dinesh Nair. Excellent.
Thank you.
Really flawless. And we would love to have you again.
Thank
you, Dr. Nair, for coordinating, for all the technical support. Thank you, Vandana ma'am. Thank you, each and every one of you. Have a great day, wonderful day. God bless.
Veena, about the feedback form.
Yes, the feedback link will be given to everybody. Yes.
Telegram.
You have to fill the feedback form and then you'll be given an e-certificate in a week's time. Thank you.
Thank you. Apurva sir, let's end the session.